On May 28, 1999, Universal's Islands of Adventure opened to the public. It opened with an original soundtrack that played in the park. At the time, it was one of the only parks that had such an edition. Despite Islands of Adventure not opening to great financial or business success due to poor marketing and the 9/11 attacks, it was received very well by critics and was considered to be one of the best theme parks in the world. Today, it still holds that title as being one of the best in the world, with additions such as Harry Potter and King Kong coming to the parks in later years. And there's no doubt that a reason for why it's considered one of the best in the world is because of this original soundtrack that still is played in the parks today. You see, just how like a movie score can set the tone and the mood for a scene, the soundtrack for a theme park can also tell the guests how to feel in a land and further immerse them into a new world. For instance, at the entrance to the park, there is a specific main theme that plays as guests enter. This track is rightfully called the Call to Adventure, as it excites guests for the day they have in front of them and encourages them to continue to explore the full park as presented in front of them, and also sends home the point that they are no longer in the real world and they have been transported to somewhere entirely different. The scenery, rides, and attractions do a good job of doing this, but they can't do it alone. The soundtrack brings it to a whole nother level that really helps immerse the guests in the land and brings them into that new, fresh world. For example, most of the scenery in the Jurassic Park section of the park is just trees and foliage. With this alone, the guests don't really feel like they're anywhere other than the real world. But once music is introduced and helps the guests to know where they are, even a little bit of theming can go a long way. This track playing right here plays in the playground section of Jurassic Park, where guests are encouraged to explore and scout out the land, but while also being assured that they are safe while doing it, as you could tell through the kind of vacation tropical vibes being heard through the song as well. Of course, this also fits in thematically with Jurassic Park, as there is kind of the danger and adventurous side of it with it being dinosaurs, but also kind of the safe and vacation-y side of it, as it is a theme park. Now, there are also some other examples where the soundtrack really plays into the scenery that they have built for the land. For instance, in The Lost Continent, which is a completely original land which is themed to the myths of the world, and is basically supposed to be a continent that was never found on Earth, that we are just now discovering. And they play this track here, which sends home the point that this is kind of a mythical land, as well as a place that's kind of ancient, as seen by the ruins everywhere and the old structures built into the stone. A lot of this we're already getting through the scenery, which is amazing in this land, but the soundtrack hammers this home for the guest and really makes them feel like they truly are in a completely different continent. So moving on from the two lands that kind of hammer home this idea of exploration and discovery, there's also Toon Lagoon, which is themed to, you guessed it, cartoon characters. And instead of just relying on the wacky surroundings and the kind of oddly shaped buildings and whatnot, the soundtrack helps build on this and incorporates noises that you would typically hear within a cartoon show into the soundtrack, so you actually feel like you're stepping into the frames of an old-time cartoon. The soundtrack over at Seuss Landing, which is themed to the books of Dr. Seuss, does a very similar thing as it attempts to transport you into the books of Dr. Seuss. The children's voices in the background kind of help to send home the point that this is more of a child-friendly land, whereas the Toon Lagoon land is more themed to kind of more the chaotic, maybe more a little more violent side of cartoons. And speaking of background music, that's precisely what this is. It's just meant to play in the background as you go through your adventures through the park. And just as a great movie score can make an impact when there's talking and noises and action happening over it, this soundtrack attempts to achieve the same thing. The final track I want to highlight is the one that plays towards the entrance of the park. Now, I already mentioned this one, the call to adventure. However, at the end of the day, when most people are leaving the park, a different track plays, titled The Adventure Lives On. Just like the final score at the end of a movie, this track allows for reflection and closure as you remind yourself of the great day you had at the park and think about all the fun you had with your friends and family, and then finally you think about the next time you'll take a trip through the islands of adventure. Thank you all for watching. The link to the soundtrack will be in the description, and if you do decide to go and listen to it, just close your eyes while listening to it, and I guarantee you, you will be transported right back to Islands of Adventure, enjoying your vacation. So, enjoy. I'll see you guys next time.